Say It Loud Network presents Corner Table Talk.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Corner Table Talk. Today, my esteemed guest is none other than Isiah Thomas, who is a familiar name to so many of us. He's a two-time NBA champion, NBA Finals MVP, 12-time NBA All-Star. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. NCAA championship as a sophomore, I might add. And you were also voted the most outstanding player. So we know about your basketball career, Isiah. It's been phenomenal. Hall of Famer, NBA Hall of Fame, College Basketball Hall of Fame. You're also a successful businessman, the chairman and CEO of Isiah International Holdings. You're a proud father and a husband. So we're welcoming you and so pleased to have you, man. Thank you for joining us on Corner Table today.
Well, thank you. And thank you for having me. And thank you for the kind words and warm introduction.
Oh, my pleasure. So I start things off, Isiah, with what I call short order questions, kind of restaurant terminology. And it's just some kind of simple questions to get us rolling and find out some cool details about you, if you don't mind. So my first one is, what is in heavy rotation on your playlist?
It definitely ain't my dog barking. Heavy rotation right now. I got some old school going on because of the IG live versus Earth, Wind and Fire versus Isley Brothers. So I've been killing a lot of Earth, Wind and Fire. You know, they from Chicago. So I've been just going back and all my Earth, Wind and Fire old cuts. That's what I've been jamming to the last 2 days.
Yeah, man, I hear you. The Isley Brothers, man, and they keep it coming too, man, all through the years from, you know, way back in the 60s. And I can listen to the Isley Brothers all day long, man. So I'm with you on that. What is your desired footwear these days? What's on your feet?
I'm still wearing gym shoes, man.
All right. Well, what kind? What brand?
I go anywhere from to Adidas to Nike. You know, the thing is, I'm not loyal to any brand, so I can wear whatever. You know, when I was playing, I had to be loyal to one brand, but you know, I'm mainly Adidas, Nike right now in terms of the shoe wear.
Okay. How about your favorite vacation destination? When you're looking to get away, man, what place really is your go-to spot?
My go-to spot for just tranquility and, you know, peace of mind and quietness is St. John's in the Virgin Islands.
Oh.
You know, it's still a well-kept secret, you know, and that's kind of where I go, even though a lot of people know about it. It just seems to be a little slice of heaven that's still there. That's kind of quiet.
Sure. The less busy of the U.S. Virgin Islands, St. Croix, St. Thomas, a little bit busier, but St. John is pretty cool. Trunk Bay, I think, is the beautiful beach there, if I'm not mistaken, right? All right. What is your favorite meal?
It's still beans and cornbread.
You say it's still. Yeah, you know, where did that start?
It started from my mom. You know, we were very poor. So, that was the meal that we always, that was the go-to meal, beans and cornbread. Excuse me. And whenever my wife wants to make me happy or when I'm, you know, down and out or whatever, you just throw in a pot of pinto beans and whip up some cornbread and I'm good to go.
And that does the trick. You know, it's funny, man. I had Norm Nixon on a few weeks ago and his go-to dish is a plate his mom makes for him, cabbage and cornbread.
Yes. I can see that.
Yeah. All right. Vegan, vegetarian, flexitarian, or none of the above?
I would pretty much say vegan in terms of, I don't eat any red meat. Every now and then I'll try some fish, but I try to stay away from anything that has a face.
And last question, what are you doing for your workout these days? That's funny. Huh? He laughs.
Yeah, I used to run, but now I walk.
Walking's good. Walking can do the trick.
Yeah, I do a lot of walking, do some push-ups and some sit-ups, but that's about it. You know, my wife, she's the fitness nut in the family. She's, she's keeping us all in shape. We're all trying to keep up with her now.
Yeah, that's great, man. I know I had stopped going to the gym, of course, during COVID and found other ways to try and stay in shape. But as they say, Father Time is undefeated, man. So, I guess it's just downhill, but we're gonna fight the good fight. So, thank you again, Isiah, for joining. And, today I was talking to our dear friend, Ambassador Shabazz, earlier, and she mentioned an interview, actually more of a conversation than an interview that you had done and brought my attention to it. And I have a number of pages of notes and questions and conversation topics I want to get to. But when I watched this conversation this morning, I just felt really moved by it and wanted to go right to that, if you don't mind. And it's a conversation you had with Magic back in 2018, I believe it was. And where you went, I believe it took place in his offices. But you and he hadn't spoken for a while. And, those of us who follow the NBA have heard different things about why that might have been. But what I'm more interested in and just wanted to kind of get your take on was that conversation. And I have to tell you, man, as a black man and as a former athlete, someone who's admired you guys and the growth of the NBA, the prominence of the players, and just how you've come to represent culture and just the influence that you have globally, to watch you two sit 4 feet apart, almost knee to knee, and have the kind of conversation that you had and touch on the things that intersected me as just a normal citizen's life, the Jackson 5 and baseball. And you made fun of Magic socks. And I recognize those socks, man, because it's kind of like a little bit of a LA thing, but they would kind of fly at the same time. But you guys had a really, really meaningful conversation, Isiah, and so much came out of that, man, about how serious you were about competing, about the sport, about winning. And at the end, the embrace that it brought tears to my eyes. You guys were having your own set of emotions. But do you mind just kind of unpacking that experience a little bit, man? And it was just a beautiful interview and a really special moment, man, that all of us that got to watch it could witness. But do you mind just taking us through that a little bit? It
was a powerful, emotional moment for us. And all the things that you just described, we didn't know at that time the impact that it would have on people who watch and who was watching. We was just, two guys trying to figure it out and come together, not necessarily trying to make a space for others to be able to come together. However, after the interview, we realized, and I realized every time that I went through the airport, how important that moment was, not only for us, but as you mentioned, for yourself and others, because people would come up to me and say, hey, I'm so glad that you and Magic had that conversation, because it inspired me to go back and have a conversation with, one of my old friends that I had fell out with and hadn't spoken to for years. But, watching you two come together made me go back and find my old friend and come together. And, we were just trying to, have a good conversation, but also trying to come together and build our friendship back up. So it was a powerful moment for us, but it turned out being a powerful moment for all those who watched also. And we're glad that happened, but that wasn't the intent. The intent was really just, to be vulnerable, let your guard down, and really on camera say, how we felt about each other.
Yeah, man. Thank you. That was really beautiful, man. We had spoken to Jackie Jackson a few weeks ago. We had him on the podcast, and Jackie, man, he's just that cat, man. I love Jackie. And he got emotional, Isiah, during one of the moments. He was talking about the first time that the group went overseas. They were flying to Heathrow, to London. And the pilot came on the plane and announced that they had the Jackson 5. And you got to remember, back then, man, there was no internet. So you really didn't know the news like we know it now. They didn't know what to expect. And there were 10,000 people at the airport waiting for them. And the plane landed and crowds going crazy. And, it's their first trip overseas, and they were all taken by it. But they went into the inner cities in London, man. And the black kids, the black English kids were coming up to them and were just so emotional and taken by these young black kids that they hadn't seen, we hadn't seen, us as Americans hadn't seen young black kids that were like these guys. We all, like you and Magic, you were going through the songs, and I'd said to Jackie, man, I knew every one of each of your parts, those songs so well. But you guys, the NBA players, man, are also exporters of our culture and representative of what, we aspire to be as black men, and that you project that image so well around the globe, man. That was also how that impacted me, that anybody can watch you two in that moment, be vulnerable, be honest, be so articulate. And it empowers, I think, the rest of us to feel a little released that way and feel like, yeah, we can do that too. We can be like that too. Well,
thank you for that. And, we were always, that way. And we were always conscious of representing, our culture and in terms of black men and how we treated people and how we presented ourselves. So thank you for saying that, because that was something that we were very conscious of. Even when we would hug and embrace and kiss each other, that was, if you remember, back in the day, that was a big thing, because, male masculinity, you wasn't supposed to have any emotion. You were supposed to be tough. And so us breaking down those barriers during that time, especially in sport, where it's all about masculinity and trying to compete. So we were definitely trendsetters in terms of, opening up emotionally, being vulnerable, and letting people know, hey, man, this dude is more than a friend to me. He's family. This is my brother, and when I greet and meet my brothers and my sisters, I don't give them a handshake. I hug them and I kiss them.
Right.
That's how we meet and greet each other as family members. Yeah. And, our relationship had gone beyond, a friendship. I couldn't give them a cold handshake like, hey, man, how you doing? No, it had to be a warm embrace like I would do with one of my brothers when I saw them.
Yeah, man, and you're a little bit younger than me, but you can probably relate, man. I remember a time when we used to speak to one another in the street. We would walk past one another and nod, give a little acknowledgement, man, and, I never said to my father until maybe his very last day, I never told him that I loved him. It just wasn't something that we expressed love towards one another. In many ways, we had a fantastic relationship. But I tell my son ad nauseum that I love him, without any hesitancy, man. And I think, to your point, Isiah, and the images of you and Magic as these just, iconic athletes and people that we look up to, you're okay being vulnerable. You're okay showing some emotion. I think you gave permission to the rest of us, man, to show that too. Well,
thank you. And, that definitely was the intent. And I'm glad that it happened that way. Although we took a lot of flack for it.
Yeah, you did.
It was definitely well worth it. Families and friends, being able to say, I love you. Though that's big, and it's one thing to show it, but it's also good to hear it. And when you combine the two together in terms of showing it and hearing it, love can be very powerful.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well said. So I'm going to change topics here and let's talk a little basketball, a little college basketball. I watched the NCAA's March Madness, and I have to say the girls' final game was exciting and a phenomenal finish. The final men's game was not as exciting as the semifinal game, and that one will go down, in history. That last shot that Suggs hit, the bank shot, was, that's going to be that's a Christian Laettner moment, I guess you might call that. What was your impression, Isiah, of March Madness in the tournament this year?
Well, first of all, I thought they did a great job during COVID to put it all together. They simulated what the NBA had done with the bubble and bringing everybody together, all the teams together in Indianapolis and also in San Antonio, putting everybody together and keeping them confined. So they did a great job with that. In terms of the competition on the men's side, I always felt that Baylor was very underrated. I always felt that they were the better team. I felt last year that, that they were the best team going, and then COVID hit. And so when they came back this year, I just thought that, that they would be the team to look out for. And that's what proved to be the point.
Do you see, when you look at these guys, man, these athletes now, do you see how the game is elevating? I mean, it looks to me like that, but I didn't play at your level. I played in college, but had nowhere near the career that you did. But I love the game, and I watch basketball. But when I see these cats now, man, they can play. These boys ball. Do you see that? Do you see the elevation of the game?
Absolutely. Not only can they play, but the fitness level has definitely improved. When you look at, their imagination in terms of how far they dare to shoot from the basket now. When we was playing, you would practice that in the summer, but you would never really do it in a game. But you see how the imagination has been stretched, how they expanded the boundaries of the shooting, which has really, opened up the game a lot more.
Sure. And I remember, I played in the 70s. I went to UMass, and I know my UMass teammates who are going to listen to this would be upset with me if I didn't mention that. So, but one of I played from 75 to 79. One of my teammates actually transferred from the Indiana undefeated team, Mark Haymore, and ended up playing with us at UMass. And
I'm sure he had some stories about Coach Knight.
Oh man, he had a few. Yeah, Mark was a great guy, man. He's passed away, rest in peace. But he was phenomenal. But going back to that period, relative to your point about conditioning, we didn't lift weights. There was the rumor that if you did, it would throw off your jumper, or, something that was not true. You could balance both. But did you do any weight training at Indiana? Was that part of the conditioning program?
It was part of it, but it was begrudgingly and half-hearted.
Right.
And also, nutrition wise, in terms of the way you had to eat, back then you just ate anything. Where these guys are at now from a training standpoint, they train 24/7. They're very conscious of what they eat, what they don't eat. So their body is in tip-top shape from a training, weightlifting, nutrition standpoint. They're really hitting on all cylinders, which makes them, a little bit better.
Yeah, and I would agree. When you look at LeBron and how he's been able to extend his career, or Tom Brady, and to your point about what they eat and how they take, it's an endeavor to just make sure that they are ingesting the right food, working out with trainers and stuff that we really didn't have access to, back in the 70s for sure, when we were still playing in canvas cons. That was our sneaker.
Well, Brad, at some point in time, all of us, they say Father Time gets us, right? And we'll lose that step, or we'll lose that jumping ability. But everything else kind of stays. You only, you don't get any faster. You may get a little slower, and you may not jump as high. But if we would have still trained and kept our body in shape the way these guys do now, I'm sure a lot of us could extend it and played into the 40s also.
That's true, man. And I had actually just had hip replacement a couple of years ago. And I think back to, playing ball in the park on asphalt, again, in sneakers that really, if I walk in them these days, those old canvas cons, I'm like, my knees hurt, with the kind of, the way that sneakers, tennis shoes have evolved. And again, with the strength and conditioning that these athletes go through, hopefully they will avoid some of the injuries and hip and knee replacements that some of us of a certain age are having to go through now for our days on the court.
Yeah. And it is showing, because of, again, like you mentioned, Tom Brady. I mean, what more is he going to lose from a physical standpoint? As long as he's lifting weights and training properly, he can keep his arm strength, right? He never ran a 4.4 or a 4.5. As long as he's got a good offensive line, he's going to be all right.
And that Tampa Bay style offense was perfect for him. So he's fit right in. I'd say before we move off of the NCAA, there's, of course, every year the tournament comes up and it's so popular. So the discussion again around whether or not amateur athletes deserve to be paid. You've got Nike who makes money. The schools make money. Coaches are well paid. The networks are all making money. Yet these kids, can't. Their jerseys sell out in sports stores, but they're not going to be paid from any of that. I know it's a deep subject and there's no easy answer, but do you have a take on that?
Yeah, I have two takes on it. Yes, they should be paid, but the other thing is, the classifications that we consent to at a very early age. These classifications really impact your life trajectory, so being classified, as a student athlete, what does that really mean when you sign those scholarship papers? Now, student athlete sounds good. It's a nice, catchy phrase, but, within that scholarship paper, now you're signing a contract, which takes away all of your rights. And just as a prisoner, you become property of the state. As a student athlete, you really do become property of the university. And those are the things that, so when you use the word amateurism, what does that mean legally? Student athlete, what does that mean legally? So these classifications that we consent to and unknowingly just toss around because they're nice words. Okay, they have legal definition, legal description, and the players should be paid, in my opinion. However, when you consent to being a student athlete and you sign those scholarship papers, what rights are you signing away? Mm-hmm. And should you have legal representation now at the table when you sign in a scholarship? What does that mean? What rights are you giving up? Mm-hmm. Those are things that need to be looked into.
Of course. And, at that time in a young person's career coming out of high school, you're anxious for the next level. You're not sophisticated. Chances are some of our parents would not be familiar with the documents that we're signing. So to your point, yeah, some legal representation might be a wise thing to do. Turning to the NBA and what we all, saw last year and the protests and the pandemic and the league being very quick to react and shut down midway in March. What's your feeling about how the league responded, kind of its narrative, what its narrative has been around the social justice issue? Adam Silver seems to be leading the way in a way that we can all kind of appreciate. But I'm curious to hear what's your take about how the league has handled this challenging year that we've had.
I think as a league, the league has gone about as far as it can go in terms of what the owners have contributed, what the league itself has basically said they will do. Then it comes back to us as a society, right? It comes back to, again, these racial classifications. And we have to come together and say, okay, we said we wanted to have the race conversation, but have we really had it? We've talked about it, and, has race really been understood? It's a made up concept that we have all consented to fall into, black, white, brown, yellow, these artificial colors that we have been given has taken us out of, the human race category, and so when you want to talk about having a race conversation, first thing we need to discuss is, does race truly exist? Now, scientifically, we know it doesn't exist. So the second thing is, why are we consenting to it?
Okay. Yes, I'm with you. And so our beliefs,
it's like, when you were young, you believed in Santa Claus. right? And then when you got older, you found out there was no Santa Claus. Well, I think we're all old enough now that we know that race doesn't exist, but yet we still consent to being governed and ruled by these racial classifications. And what does that mean? That means that if you're classified as white, which is the highest on the status category, because we're not talking about race, we're talking about status. Right. White is a status, black is a status, brown, people of color, yellow people. I mean, listen to what we're saying, Brad, right? Black people, white people, brown people, yellow people, people of color. I mean, are we really that naive? And we have been that naive, right? But I think we're all smart enough now that we can rise out of these color-coded boxes that separates us, very similar to our apartheid. When you look up the definition for apartheid, it states that it takes you out of the human race and it puts you in these color-coded boxes. That's what we're in.
Well, Isiah, you bring up South Africa, and that's an interesting analogy to me. So when apartheid was broken up back in the 90s, I believe that was, they had following that what they call the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, which allowed the victims of apartheid to have some of the perpetrators of apartheid show up in a courtroom, admit to the atrocities, apologize there for letting the victim hear the apology and forgive and move on. Clearly, nothing as formal as that has ever happened in this country. And, Ta-Nehisi Coates made a strong case for reparations, and there's, that ongoing discussion. Do you feel that there needs to be some kind of recognition? I mean, you talk about a race discussion before there can be reconciliation. Have we had that?
No, we have not had that. We've said that we want to have the conversation and it's time for the conversation. But every time somebody tries to talk about the conversation, we never really have the conversation because we still consent to being black, white, brown, yellow, blue, green, purple, and orange people, right? And until we can rise out of these classifications and get back to the human race and understand that, hey, the international community, white is not a nationality. Black is not a nationality. People of color is not a nationality. Brown people is not a nationality. And in this country, we have been taken out of our human race category in our nationality and have been placed as other. And, in this country, when you're born as white, you don't have to fight for rights. You're given birthrights. Mm-hmm. When you're black, brown, a woman, or any other color, you have to fight for civil rights. You have to fight to be incorporated into the Union of States. And so when we agree to these classifications, what do they really mean legally and constitutionally, and also in the international community? Right? You've traveled outside the United States. And when you travel outside of the United States, you classify as an American. Mm-hmm. When you come back into the United States, you say you black. Why is that? You are a spokesperson, and thank you for that. I recently saw, I don't know if you got to see A Night in Miami, with Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, Sam Cooke, and Jim Brown. And the conversations, the thing that left such an impression on me was the Kemp Powers wrote the screenplay, the dialogue, the conversation between those guys, man. If you're talking to Magic and Magic's talking to Jay-Z and Jay-Z is talking to Denzel, and those kinds of conversations are evolving out of those kinds of meetings, then I feel like we'll get somewhere with this conversation. I mean, you're so influential, but are those the kind of conversations that you're having with contemporaries? We can have those conversations. However, there's been a breakdown in terms of our collectiveness, in terms of moving our people to truth and understanding history. when you and I came up, in the 60s and the 70s, the music spoke the truth. There was a collectiveness that was coming from the community about how we untangle ourselves from these classifications of being declassified, keyword, being declassified from the human race. We wanted to be seen as human again. You know, the Montgomery March, when they said, I am a man. We were talking about treating us as human beings. And Brad, and I'm sure you remember this, you know, when you were growing up, just as I do. If somebody called you black, oh, we getting ready to fight. You know, I mean, that wasn't, you know, so you, and that generation understood the declassifications of what was going on to us educationally and systemically. So when they talked about the system, when you and I were growing up and they was talking about the system, now they call it systemic racism. But when they was talking about the system, we knew the pitfalls in the educational system. We knew the pitfalls in the health system. We knew the pitfalls politically. Our music was telling us that, right? And then at home, yeah, we had to pass the test in school and get an A on the test that said Christopher Columbus discovered America. But then when we came back home, your mom and dad was telling you, no, that's some BS.
That's what happened.
And these people that they call Indians now and all that, we were always here. These classifications that they've given us, you know, the European, it tells you in history, the European came over here. We were always here. Now, yes, there was a slave trade also. That happened too. You know, there were people from Florida all the way to Mexico, you know, and so this landmass was always populated before 1492. And that's what we have to get back to in terms of teaching history.
Yes.
I mean, real history.
Yes.
I mean, there's beliefs and then there's facts. And just like we believed in Santa Claus, we believe in race. But factually, Santa Claus is not here, neither is race. That's what the science tells us.
Yeah. I want to get back to music, though, for a minute and stay on this subject because it's fascinating to me. You know, you talk about some of the music that we listened to growing up, and one of my favorite artists is Gil Scott-Heron, and I watched a YouTube interview of him the other day talking about the inspiration for Revolution Will Not Be Televised, right? And, you know, if you just listen to that song casually, you think that this is a black man preaching for revolution in the streets and violence, you know, but he said, I was talking about a revolution of the mind.
Yes.
That was the message, a revolution of the mind. And so, Isaiah, I know, you know, you grew up on the west side of Chicago. And for those that aren't familiar, the west side of Chicago was probably maybe a little rougher, we'll say, than the south side of Chicago, which got that was all I ever heard of. Oh, south side of Chicago is rough, but the west side was no joke, man. In 1975, the New York Times said it was one of the worst neighborhoods in the country. That's where you grew up, one of 9, playing ball. So you have a context of that in your background. You've got a young baby face. You would make a great gangster in a movie because your smile is disarming while you're killing the enemy. You know, you're smiling. You got that baby face, right? I think you make a good gangster. But when you see when you know the music and the inspiration, and we were children of the civil rights movement, right? That benefited school and benefited for jobs and opportunities. Even though I had to laugh when I saw that you signed for $1.6 million when you signed with Detroit. And I know that might look that contract might look a little different for an Isiah Thomas today. But the point that I wanted to make and question that I wanted to ask, when you see how hip hop has become a global influence and the artists have become influencers, right? Around the world, selling Sprite, selling McDonald's, selling anything. The message, unfortunately, that also got delivered by some of those same artists sent a tough message into our communities, right? And I know that you have championed an end to gun violence. You have done I have a list of social programs that you've started, one, I think, in your mom's name. But I guess the point that I'm trying to make and the question I want to ask is, do you see that some of that messaging did us a disservice, man?
Absolutely. And there's 3 levels of music generationally that has taken place in all communities. And as you pointed out earlier, unfortunately in America, our Black culture, not our Black race, our Black culture is exported through sports, music, and entertainment because they don't acknowledge our intellectual capacity in the Black race here in America. So the Black intellectuals, John Henry Clark, W.E.B. Du Bois, they're not studied enough. They're not taught enough. So we don't really get a chance to really expand our intellectual vehicle. So the vehicle that we're always placed in, sports and music. Now, the music of the 60s and 70s was telling us to resist, but also inspiring us to be better men, to be better women, be better people. But it was also talking about, if you go back and you listen to Claudine, and you listen to Mr. Welfare Man, that's what happened in my home. The United States government broke up my mom and dad's relationship because we had to go on welfare. And when you go on welfare, guess what? The man has to be out of the house and the social worker comes. And if you listen to those lyrics, when she says, they keep on saying, I'm a lazy woman, Joe, love my children, but I'm mentally unfit. I must divorce him, cut all my ties with him because his ways, they make me sick. It's a hard sacrifice. They was telling us what was going on. Not only was they telling us what was going on, the fight in this country, and it's still today, the classified Black man and woman has always been fighting the U.S. government. So when you talk about what was going on the West Side, well, yeah, our community was bad, but this is the message that was going on the West Side. It started with Noble Drew Ali in terms of Moorish Americans introducing the thought and the concepts and scientifically proven that we were always here on this landmass. And then it went from there. You had the Black Panther movement come in. Then you had the first original gang, the Vice Lords. But all these were community-based organizations. Martin Luther King moved on the West Side for a certain period of time. The only college in America right now that's named after Malcolm X is on the West Side of Chicago. So that level of resistance, that level of intelligence, that level of understanding of who we are as a people, that's why the United States government and J. Edgar Hoover came to the West Side and said, we got to stop this movement from happening. And they pitted the South Side against the West Side, put drugs in the community, and basically locked up and jailed all the other people. Now, I'm not making this up. If you go and read COINTELPRO, that's the information that came out of the FBI and the government. So I come out of that thought. And the last point I'm going to hit, Brad, is when you talked about enslaving the mind. Because during that period of time, there was a resistance. There was a resistance not to have your mind enslaved, but to be free of thought. And remember, just like your parents, my parents, some TV they wouldn't let you watch. I'm sure you came up in a house where it's like, no, you can't watch that. You can't listen to that. You can't speak to that. Well, the first messages that came out in hip hop, when hip hop first came out, Grandmaster Flash with the message, right? They were still speaking to, hey, this is what the system does to you. And this is how you got to interact and move. But that message changed in hip hop. And then it started promoting and selling all the negative stereotypes that was happening inside our household, inside the community, that people were always trying to not give into these negative stereotypes. Then the music started promoting the stereotypes. And then when it started promoting the stereotypes to the white larger community, that white community will buy the stereotype, and they would buy the stereotype, and that became their music of choice. So Brad, you walking into an office today, they would say you different. You're not like other black men or women, but we really all the same. But what's been transported and moved out into the international community are the stereotypes, which people think that sets us as a larger group of people.
Well said, man. And I've been in the restaurant business my entire life. And one of the things that I have always felt, I've written about a little bit, and, this last year with restaurants kind of being thrust into the forefront in terms of the news cycle because of how bad the COVID affected frontline workers was, I'm concerned that our stories don't get told. And by example, there was a guy named Thomas Bullock out of Detroit, in fact, and he wrote a mixology book, a drink book back in 1917. I've been in the restaurant business my entire life. I studied hotel and restaurant management in college. I'd never heard of this cat, man. Never heard of him. He was in no history book, no cocktail book, no nothing. How many of those stories are there of the accomplishments, the achievements, the things that would inspire us? My dad was in the restaurant business. I learned it from him. I know he didn't know about Thomas Bullock. Would he have approached the cocktails, the bar side of our business different had he known that this gentleman had done something like that in 1917? I guess the point, Isiah, that I'm making here is, how do we start to affect this narrative in the way that is going to have just a different impact? And I allude to the social programs that you've bravely started and continue to be a part of all throughout your community. But what's needed here, man? What do we need to do? What do we need to be talking about? And who do we need to be talking with and to?
I'll go back to some of your first comments earlier in this conversation where you say when you were growing up, you never walked past a brother without acknowledging him or her or speaking to him. There was an amount of human decency that we always fight to maintain, to keep, keyword to keep with each other. Well, we always looked at each other as human and not less than. And over time, through our educational system, through all cultural breakdowns, we have failed to continue to look at our brothers and sisters as humans. And we fell into what white supremacy and what the classified white has always wanted to move us into a space where we are less than human. And then they don't have to do the work. We're doing the work for them by treating each other the way we're treating each other. I still to this day will not allow anyone to call me the N-word. No, I don't care what classified color you are, don't ever call me that. I don't accept that. And we gotta raise all standards of how we treat each other first. And once we do that, then we gotta get back to studying. We gotta get back to really understanding our history, because the educational system, like you just said, there was a brother who digged a cocktail book, and you never knew of him. Well, that's no accident. It's set up that way. Mm-hmm. And I never forget, my father used to always say, and it never dawned on me until I was about maybe, 27, 28 years old. He said, Junior, every time you watch television and every book you read, understand this. You are classified as Black in America. They're not talking to you.
Pops Thomas. I love that. You talk about the N-word, and it's funny. I was sitting in my car the other day. I was listening to Richard Pryor from one of his first albums. He used the N-word in the title, but it brought me back in one of his bits that was very funny. But what you just said brought me back to when Richard came back from Africa. And he decided he was not going to use the N-word anymore because he quoted, he didn't see any N-words over in Africa. And it forced him into rethinking, our acceptance and use of that word. So, I'm with you on that. I want to read something, Isiah, because you have this long list of philanthropic work, community minded work. This one, I thought just really kind of summed it up. And in February of 2017, you were presented with the AT&T Humanity of Connection Award during its annual Black History Month celebration in honor of Lewis H. Latimer at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington. You were honored for your historic achievement in sports and your countless contributions to the African American community as a leader in the sports, business, and philanthropic interests. That's pretty major, man. How did that strike you, and what did that mean to you to receive that honor?
It was a great honor, and I guess it was one of the highest honors that I have ever received because, in the sports world, you win a championship, you get a trophy, you do what you need to do to win the basketball game, and you are applauded and rewarded for that. I always said that if all I'm remembered for is playing basketball when I die, then I've done a bad job with the rest of my life. If the only thing that people can say about Isiah Thomas when I die is, man, he could shoot, man, he could really dribble, and that's all you have to say with the rest of my life, I've done a really bad job. So receiving that award, it just allowed me to think that I was on the right path of being remembered for other things than just playing basketball.
Well, brother, you could shoot and dribble and do all those things, no doubt, better than almost everyone else. But the fact that those other things matter to you as much as they do, I know is going to be a big way of how people remember you when they talk about you. At this point, I want to bring in a dear friend of both of ours. And normally I have her come in at the tail end of the show and we kind of summarize and then she gives a few travel tips. But because you guys are friends, you two are friends, and this is a really special guest for us, I'm going to ask Ambassador Shabazz to join us. And I know that you both you worked on a little something together, I think in Belize, but Ambassador, I'm going to let you jump in and say hello to Isiah and let you guys engage in a little bit of back and forth at this point.
Well, thank you for having me on the corner table. And I want to welcome Professor Thomas for this past missive. And nothing could be more exciting for me to spend time with people I respect. And this is plural. This goes to both of you. I've grown up with you, Mr. Johnson, and our relationship has, for me, been most significant in so many familial and dedicated ways. And just, having this opportunity to share even this forum is really key. And to have started a new relationship maybe about 7 or 8 years ago with Isiah Thomas has been rich from the beginning. From the absolute, we were brought together for a formal reason having to do with the WNBA. And from the moment we had dinner, I knew I had a little brother with me forever. Just absolutely earnest, authentic, clear, definitive, and someone that I knew I could just back and be backed by 100% without having second thought. Experiencing you, I'm going to call you Professor Thomas because of these last 40 minutes and what you've shared, experiencing you and your dedication to the young women on the New York Liberty, where I had the blessing and the fortune to spend some time and do some life coaching, and watching you as not a player, not as a headline, but in full action as a father, dedicated. I mean, I all of them have that cheese, that smile he has. They all have it. Watching him as a husband, but also watching him as a real steward on behalf of the wellness and the proper treatment and the advocacy for female players. I was all in. And so I just want to say welcome to the corner table and the fact that the two of you get to exchange with each other, two people that are significant in my life, having the opportunity as brethren to share and as Africans in the Western Hemisphere to find link and coexistence, and that we cannot feel as isolated. I want to go back to that time when we met and a restaurant you took me to in Hell's Kitchen. What was that? Was it one of your spots?
Actually, it was one of Lauren's spots. She suggested it. I don't remember the name of it, but I do remember that dinner, and it was quite impactful for me. And thank you for just being so open and honest from day one, and all the help you've given to my family and myself, and Lauren and Lynn. You've been a true sister for real.
Well, it's really you. All of us live and navigate in this world, and we are never, justice is never done when we have a headline that defines us or a paragraph that defines us. And when you meet people and they are naturally authentic and giving, it was such an easy accord for me. And listening to the content of this conversation, as I was sharing with Mr. Johnson over the last couple of years, I'm sure I've referenced it, but certainly in preparation for this, that this is not a regular conversation, nor is he as a restaurateur. I mean, people don't know the full of us. You all have talked about the fact that we have one-liners associated to who we are, but never the dimension of who we are as Africans in the Western Hemisphere. Right? What is that narrative? So I don't have a discomfort of being called Black because I kind of like it. But because for me, Black does not have a negative connotation. So now it's understanding that even if you refer to people by hues or tones, that it can't have a classification, which you all referenced. It should not be a vertical classification, but it could be a descriptive one if you're looking for somebody up the block, round the corner, or
right.
or whatever, right? But then it might be a Black person from Ghana, a Black person from the North, a Black person from the so-and-so, but none of that should have a negative. So what we should possibly do is learn about the values of who we are, so that when Black is not a classification, but an adjective, it's a referential point, it's the high five or the familiarity that you can use in the cultural narrative of a story. And I want to thank you also because during some of our conversations, much like this, you, on behalf of your mother's foundation and another mutual friend, Mignon Moore, sponsored a delegation of 4 American young people in the culinary hospitality industry to journey for a fellowship in Belize that I have to say, that was in 2018. It's the gift that keeps giving. It changed and shifted their immersion, their self-perception, and life, and I'd like to know more about what Mary's Court is doing.
Well, what we're doing now is continue to immerse ourselves in the educational space, and in seeking out ways to bring out truer information about Africans on this side of the globe, and what our journey has been here in America, and just trying to educate and free the mind and not fall into the beliefs of the narratives and stories that you've been told, but introducing other books, introducing other writers, introducing other people who have really, studied. My goal right now is to find as much information, about John Henry Clark to introduce to kids in school at a very young age, to introduce some of, Dr. Francis Wesley's work to young kids in school, just so they understand the system that we're in. Because I think if, just as we did when we were younger, if we understand the system, the way that we're being governed legally, and the way the political system works, if we collectively come together, we can navigate our way through this system. But if you don't understand how the system is working against you, it's going to continue to open up the pit holes for you to fall into. So when we do if we ever have the race conversation, then the race conversation will have to be followed by a change of the system. Because if we don't change the system, then we're going to continue to be in this condition as classified Black people in America.
And the more information that we have about ourselves, the origin information, I was blessed in my life to start with the truth or closest to the truth. So I didn't have an identity that was based on a comparative existence. I didn't start with that. That came later when I started to see how how the classifications of people of color, all peoples of color, including white, were in vertical caste system form. I learned that outside the house, but I did not learn that in the house. So my value as I entered the world as a Black person, there was something quite wonderful. And that wasn't based on hue. That wasn't based on what percent. That was just based on root, self, seed, as a glory of being African in the Western Hemisphere. And I still have that, right? So when I think about the 2 young men, 2 young women, we had an immersion that engaged the culinary aspect. So they weren't just cooks. Right? They weren't just learning how to move the pan around. They were really in the garden. They were in the farms. They were doing agribusiness and the processing thereof. How does this show up traditionally? I wanted them to hold on to the Caribbean tradition of foods. And how does that show up in the upscale resorts? And then how do you make it fun food accessible for the American delegation of 40 young Black boys, teenagers that came over that weren't used to food that wasn't processed, and just keeping the narrative of heritage, the narrative of story, the narrative of tradition, same ingredients, and moving them around. And I tell you, it was the food justice component even, the balance of distribution of food was just really a rich experience for them. And because of the distance geographically, you have not been able to sit down with them. And I can't wait till there's that round table in person. You said you like to hug. I know we got to dap differently nowadays, but I can't wait for you to see how your impact has touched younger people who represented 3 different countries themselves, respectively. 2 are first-generation American and 2 were in the culinary industry, and their lives have been changed forever.
That is always good to know, because you never know who you're touching, and you never know who those people will grow up to be. But the fact that you can help and extend your kindness, and it reaches miles away. Again, that just shows you the power of love, shows you the power of kindness and giving. And when that is extended and people receive it and give it back and give it out to others, that's a beautiful and powerful thing.
Yeah, it certainly is.
Well, we are, thank you for that. And we are, I knew this would come too quickly as we're approaching the end. But one of the things that occurs to me as I'm listening to you both and looking at you on the screen, although our listeners will only hear the audio of this, is, one of the advantages or the unintended, I would say, good effects of this past year has been this technology that has allowed us to see one another and talk to one another from wherever we are. And Isiah, your willingness to come on this program and speak with us both, one of the things that I felt has been missing for our culture in the past, however many years since we lost magazines like Jet, and we don't have a central voice. And the world is moving so fast, right? We have these devices in our hands and we're checking all of these different things and so much information is flying at us. But the value of conversation, just taking a moment to talk to someone and listen to the response and have a back and forth. So I hope that you've enjoyed this as much as we have. And I'm just really, really grateful that you've taken time out of your busy schedule to join the ambassador and I, and just want to say thank you.
Thank you for having me. And I hope we continue this conversation and do it again.
Thanks so much. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining Ambassador Shabazz and I on Corner Table Talk this week. That was special, huh? He was pretty cool.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Wonderful.
Well, we'll be back with our How We Move segment in our next episode of Corner Table Talk. But thank you, Isiah Thomas, for joining us. And thank you, Ambassador Shabazz, as always, for your insights and taking part.
My pleasure.
Corner Table Talk is hosted by Brad Johnson, produced by Brad and Linda Ailes Johnson, coordinating producer Lauren Turner, theme music Life Goes On by Bryce Vine, executive producers Omar Thompson, Andrew Kalb, and Ken Johnson. Find the Corner Table Talk podcast wherever you get your podcast. Follow, subscribe, rate, and leave a comment. Corner Table Talk is a Say It Loud Network production.